We are back with another episode of Highway to Hill, a pro-Congress podcast about the messiest and most important branch of government. I am Charlie Hunt, political scientist at Boise State University. I am joined, as always, by SoRelle Gaynor from University of Virginia. Hey, SoRelle.
Hey, Charlie.
And we are lucky to be joined by our very first guest, and he's a special one, our Congress Explained co-author, Denver Nuggets aficionado, Casey Burgat from George Washington University. What's up, Casey?
Heck yes. Thank you for having me on. Great to be with y'all.
Today on Highway to Hill, we are diving deep in the heart of Texas, where very tight primaries for both parties are winding up next week to decide the nominees for a U.S. Senate seat. Who is running in Texas? Where do they stand? And what do these races tell us about the state of the two major parties as we close in on 9, probably very short months before the midterms? They're going to fly. So let's get into it with our first segment. Let's lay out the basics here. The parties' primaries for both of these nominations are up next week. Same-day voting is on Tuesday. Early voting has been underway for over a week. Casey, let's go to you first. You can pick your primary, buddy. Democrats or Republicans? We want to lay out who is running here and what we should know about them.
Holy smokes, a Sophie's choice. Which side of the aisle are we going? Let's start with the D side. Let's start with the Talarico versus Crockett primary. And you mentioned sports at the beginning, and I'll bring it back. I'll land this plane, so stay with me for a second. But Texas has always been, or at least for our generation, like the state we look to of like, man, if Dems can flip this, then they're going to have... Is it finally here? Like, is this the time that they finally get over the finish line and have a Democratic senator from Texas? And I'm concerned, if I were on the Democratic side, is how much of the resources are going to be going to this race when it could otherwise go to more competitive races. I'm sure we're going to get into all that. But right now we have one of the better communicators post-Obama, I think, with James Talarico. He is not afraid to go anywhere and everywhere to speak a moderate Christian conservatism in Texas while still being on the progressive side. So interesting to watch him do it. And then we have, obviously, Crockett running here, where it is a undeniably progressive wing of the party. So how do those primary battles play out between those two, and then setting up for the general election, which is obviously going to be a completely different race? And here's where the sports come back in, because I'm coming in thinking, what would the other side most want? Right? So like if I'm watching a football game and it's 4th and 1, I often think, how does the other team want my team to go against this, as like a signal of who do we want to win? Do they want us to go for it, or do they not want us to go for it, hoping that we do what they want? And here I think Republicans are begging for a Crockett win. I think it's just going to be an easier race in their eyes. There's a much more direct campaign against her and her policies. Even we can talk about the demographics. We can talk about even just how she communicates. I think Talarico is a more formidable opponent just on the resume and on the communications front. But who knows? The voters will decide, and then we have to transition into the actual general, which will be there's going to be some transitions from that primary into the general, which are just going to be fascinating no matter who comes out.
Yeah, I think we've got like some hopes on the right of who will win here. I think we're seeing that in a lot of the super weird and toxic social media conversation around this race, where it's getting pretty nasty between these two, and you've got kind of MAGA influencers trying to kind of weigh in and broadcast who they want to win. I think we've got some of that on the other side as well that we'll get into. But SoRelle, I feel like, Casey mentioned some of the ideological differences between Talarico and Crockett, but I feel like in this primary, there have been some other really important and really tricky kinds of identity-based splits here, both in terms of who these two people are and who they're trying to appeal to. Race getting involved, religion getting involved, always a good time when those two come to play. What do you see happening here, and what is it kind of telling you about the modern day Democratic Party?
Well, I am a Texas native, so what's been interesting, I think the best way to capture it is where they're campaigning. Talarico is going to like Lubbock, and Abilene, these places that are like Trump plus 20 districts. And he's going to the suburbs of Austin, right? He's appealing to this, suburban mom. Maybe that's me. But so it's interesting that that's the voters he is trying to scoop up, which I think is exactly what, Casey was mentioning, which is if you think that a median voter still exists, like if you think there's somebody who's a moderate in the middle that could vote for either candidate that most speaks to them, like Talarico is your guy. That's how he's presenting himself. And it is interesting to see, like you mentioned, Charlie, early voting has been underway for about a week now. The numbers in these rural areas are off the charts for Democratic turnout. So, he posts these videos of him speaking at churches in these rural areas or suburban areas, and it seems to be translating somewhat versus Crockett represents the Dallas area. And so she's doing really well in Houston and Dallas. There's also what we would call some descriptive representation going on. She's doing very well with Black voters. If you just look at geographic alone, you can definitely see that those are the constituencies that they're kind of trying to target and appeal to.
Yeah, and I think you've got, it's the most recent instantiation of this classic conversation that particularly Democrats, I think, like to have, but I think it applies to both parties of like, what's your strategy? Is the best way to win this state, like to achieve what Casey was just saying, Dems finally want to achieve, is it to juice that turnout among your reliable voters in places like Dallas and Houston and Austin? Or is it to try to run up the score and get motivated a bunch of Democrats or independents who we know are real sour on Donald Trump and the Republicans right now in a lot of these outlying areas, right, in West Texas and places like that? And like always, the actual answer is like, let's do everything, right? But the question is whether, like, do we really think there are going to be big, meaningful differences between, like, devil's advocate argument? I could imagine actually both of these two performing about the same in November. Like,
Totally.
Party is party, people come home to the party, and it's going to be, at least it looks right now, to be a pretty Democratic year no matter what. Is it really going to make a big difference which of these two goes to the general? What do you think, Casey?
I think it could, right? Like if your choices, the binary choices, run up the score in Democratic strongholds, right? Like, which is the turnout method of electoral politics, run up the score and just win that way in a statewide race. Cancel out as much as you can just by voters are going to lean your side. But then the challenge is to getting them, especially low propensity voters, to show up in those numbers. So the turnout method there. And then the other choice is, can we actually not only pick off the suburban moms, which we saw were so important in especially 2020 with Joe Biden's election, right? It's people who were looking for the alternative. Just give me a reason not to go with Republicans. I think in Texas especially, that is maybe probably the better strategy, because I do think those strongholds are going to remain strongholds. If we're going to choose between the hardest path, I think to pick off voters is harder to do. But if you have a candidate in an election year that is already swinging your way, I think you rally behind that, especially when he's talking about the values of Texas, right? Like, he is good at this. He is good at using something that has just been a conservative pillar, religious argument that Democrats are anti-religious, however they're going to be painted. That's really going to be hard to do for Talarico. I think you're probably right. It's going to be close no matter what. Whoever wins would probably be about the same. But if I'm choosing the strategy that has the highest upside and the lowest floor, I'm going Talarico with him going into these outer areas, because we've proven over and over, especially with special elections and state level elections, like turnout's high in places you might not suspect it to be high, and it's high towards Democrats in places you would not see Democrats perform so well. I think you double down on that strategy, especially in Texas, especially with the way he can communicate.
If we look at Virginia, where I live now, that had an off-year gubernatorial election, you've probably seen that graphic on the New York Times of how the arrows are all shifting. These counties are all shifting towards Democrat. It's actually just that Republicans didn't show up to vote in the gubernatorial election. And so that's also part of the calculation to think about, which is like, Republicans may stay home if they see Talarico as the other option, especially if it's, we'll talk about in a minute, especially if it's Ken Paxton. They may not be thrilled about Ken Paxton, but they're probably not going to be so offended. And of course, there's a bunch of baked in bias there too, but Talarico may be less. He is presenting himself as more of a moderate, right? And so that may be less offensive, essentially, to like these kind of wishy-washy Republican voters.
Well, and the question is like thinking about it from like a game theory perspective. Like, if you nominate Talarico, like, do we really think that like diehard Democratic voters who hate Donald Trump, who are like fired up, are they really going to be like, well, no, my like Jasmine Crockett didn't win, so I'm going to stay home? I think that is a tough proposition and probably is not what's going to happen. Like like 99% of Democrats in Texas are going to turn out for Talarico.
I think there's an important point here that SoRelle mentioned, is that it is just as valuable to get someone new to turn out or persuade someone to go from R to D as it is to go from R to not voting. It is the same on paper, right? Like, it is just as valuable. Persuasion is incredibly harder. It takes more resources, more time. But getting someone who's just on the fence of just, again, give me a reason not to turn out for a Donald Trump or a Republican Party that I obviously, at least enough people in suburbia are questioning at this time, as his poll numbers reflect. Like, getting those folks to just be like, I can't do it this time. That is just as valuable as getting someone to convert from a Trump voter to a, let's just say, a Biden voter, which is, we know, much, much harder to do.
Let's go to one of the reasons they might decide to stay home, SoRelle, and that's Ken Paxton. We've got an interesting field here on the Republican side, a three-way primary, which is always exciting, and we've got an incumbent in the mix. Give us the lay of the land here. Who are these three guys?
Yes, and not only am I a Texan, I used to work for the incumbent, John Cornyn.
Jeez, your connections
I
everywhere.
know, I've got connections today. It was a long time ago, but, Senator Cornyn, he's been the incumbent since 2003. He's known for getting laws passed. He is still conservative, right? He is a conservative member of Congress, as any Republican in Congress is today, but he is not seen as a MAGA Republican from the get-go. In fact, infamously, when I was working for him during the first during 2016, he referred to Trump as an albatross on the Republican Party. So he has since come a long way, right? He's fully leaned in. His campaign is producing a bunch of AI slop with him and Trump and all of this. But he's also facing two candidates that are seen as super MAGA. And so one is a very junior member of the House, Wesley Hunt. He was elected in 2023. He's kind of the third wheel to the major person that he's facing, which is the current Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who is quite a Texas character. He has been found guilty of perjury and all sorts of stuff, but he's a super popular figure in MAGA Texas circles. And he's actually currently the favorite to win. The challenge, just from a logistical standpoint, is that in Texas, you have to have 50 plus 1% to vote. You have to win outright in a primary. And so with three pretty competitive candidates, Wesley Hunt is still polling at like 20%, even though he's in third place. Like, it's very unlikely we'll know who will win this primary by the end of by March, but I'll let our campaign person Charlie talk about how they're just burning cash down there.
Oh yeah, I mean, both of these campaigns. I mean, and especially, by the way, I think one of you mentioned that Talarico has a ton of money. He's got $20 million in the bank. Like, this is outrageous for any primary in the Senate, especially when you're a challenger. But there's plenty of money on the Republican side as well. Cornyn has a pretty serious war chest of over 11 million. Paxton 6 million, and Hunt sort of lagging behind with a measly 2 million in a primary. Right? Again, this is not even the general election.
We're not even at the general yet.
No, like a ton of money is being spent, and these guys are burning each other. Like the number of the communications war here is crazy with, Cornyn's team, really talking up the fact that, like, in addition to perjuring himself, like, Paxton, well documented, like, adulterer and all of this stuff, and getting
Divorce
super personal.
proceedings are getting in there.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked a little bit about how, like, the Dem race is getting a little spicy. It's nothing compared to what these GOP candidates are slinging at each other. I mean, the Cornyn team has websites that if you search Wesley Hunt or search Ken Paxton, it redirects you to, like, a list of their crimes or how little they're in office, right? It's nasty.
We were just talking about how Republicans seem to want Crockett to be the Democrats' nominee. Do we think that Paxton, who seems to be ahead, I would guess probably not going to break that 50% threshold, but probably is pretty likely to be the one coming out ahead and facing off against either Cornyn or Hunt in a runoff, right? This would be a runoff election, a two-man election that would happen later in the year. Do we think that Paxton getting nominated significantly increases the Democrats' chance of winning the seat?
I mean, this is Cornyn's closing message, which is probably not that compelling in my personal opinion, but his closing message is, if you don't elect me, we'll lose this Senate seat to a Dem. They released the NRSC, which is the National
Republican Senatorial
Committee. Anyways, they handle campaigns for the Senate.
Yeah.
They released a memo that showed how the different matchups would work. Cornyn versus Talarico, Cornyn versus Crockett, Paxton versus Talarico, Paxton versus Crockett. And Cornyn wins outright, and no matter who he's facing, is what this memo claims. But Paxton loses definitely to Talarico, and it's a toss-up against Crockett. So that's their closing message, which is, we can debate if winnability is really a compelling reason to vote for someone. But I don't know. What do you think, Casey?
So a few things that come to mind. So to me, the permutations matter here about who comes out. So if it is Cornyn versus Crockett, that is one message for Democrats. It's a completely different campaign strategy. They're talking about different things, and the race will be nasty in a different way. If it's Talarico and Paxton, I think that there is a again, talking about like just a values, Texas values, conservatism, I think that is a very favorable matchup, and that is who I think, for one reason, for the messaging, I think who Talarico and Dems would pick for this. I asked someone right when Paxton announced, this is over a year ago now when he became official in this. And I was talking about this because this is Cornyn, who's just like this inside baseball, kind of this Bush era type Republican that has transitioned into this MAGA type supporter, even if he's not loud about it. And so he's a institutional leader in every sense of the word. And I mentioned that this race is coming up and is like, man, tell me about Paxton. I didn't know enough about him. And she said, he is a party boss in the year 2025 when this was, in a way that we don't often see. Like, think boss tweet. Perfect. Like, he is full on a party boss, runs the state of Texas politics in a way that we just don't have anymore. I'm talking patronage. I'm talking donations, precinct captains.
People removed as Speaker of the Texas House. That is such a good analogy.
Party player.
Yes.
And I think that, so on paper, I think the message or the campaign of Talarico versus Paxton is a really compelling case, using all of his dirt, his personal failings against him. I think that's a really strong message, especially put up against what Talarico is good at and bringing to the table. But never underestimate the power of just running a state-level machine that he obviously seems to have at his thumb, which is going to be incredibly valuable. But the closing message that you mentioned of the polls and the matchup and the favorability stuff, that to me is just screaming. That screams desperation from someone. Yeah. Where that polling has come from, he used to lead, right? The leader of the Republican arm of the Senate campaign committee. I think he knows he's in trouble. This is a very tough spot to be in. But the failings, the personal failings, I think would be a very compelling case for a Talarico especially campaign come then. But I think it's worth even mentioning that we talked about burning resources now in the primary. They're going to have to burn more resources in the runoff too. And that's going to be incredibly nasty when it's ultimately Cornyn and Paxton. If they're holding any ammo now, is going to come out then. And it's just going to fuel the fire of giving whoever it is, Talarico or Crockett, just even more months to just let their Oppo research feed yours while they're burning on their own cash and while he's fundraising. So it ain't going anywhere.
I feel like no matter what, I don't know what's going to happen, but Democrats are definitely hoping for a runoff for the Republicans so they can burn through more money. And that sort of brings us, we'll sort of close out talking about where this race stands in the broader race for the Senate. It's a tough map. It was always going to be a tough map for the Democrats in their quest to sort of get back the Senate. And it's important to remember they need 3 seats, 3 pickups to make it a tie. But because J.D. Vance is the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, they need 4 seats to get an outright majority. They need to win 3 open seat races in swing states, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Michigan. Those are all looking pretty good for them right now. I mean, if I were going on Kalshi, I'd probably bet on them right now. But they also need to defend Jon Ossoff in Georgia. They need to defeat Susan Collins in Maine. And all of that just gets them to 49. So they need to win 2 other races in red territory. So you've got places like Alaska, where Mary Peltola is running. That gives them a decent shot. You've got Ohio, where former popular Senator Sherrod Brown is running. That was a good get for them. And then, yes, probably Texas is on the list. But it's going to be a tough climb for them no matter what. But obviously, getting this one in the bank, if they could, would be a huge step in that direction for them.
I mean, Schumer came into power as majority leader by winning Alaska, right? So way back when. So it can be done again. And yeah, I mean, it's like that it's on the table for real is very compelling.
Yeah, and I think it's just if they win Texas, if Democrats win Texas, they're going to win the Senate majority, right? Like it's almost like if they don't win Texas, then it's going to be likely a tie. They still have to defend in Minnesota. Charlie, I think, did you mention North Carolina with an open seat? That's a huge toss. I mean, the map is always difficult, but the fact that we're talking about this, and this is where, again, going back to the opening conversation of like, is this Lucy's football again with Texas? Because it's a double whammy for Democrats. Not only would it probably give them the Senate majority, which they would love to have for so many reasons in the last 2 years of Trump's term, but then also it kind of opens up the playbook. It's now possible. You're talking about a presidential race coming up, and those electoral votes are going to be a difference maker there too. So I just fear that it's going to be such a national draw of not only attention and resources that would this be better off spent in obviously Alaska, Ohio, and then maybe even Iowa, depending on the polling there, which can swing 30 points on any given day. So who knows? But a big race for sure. If they win it, they'll get the majority.
Okay, so I want to dive into one particular area, SoRelle, that you alluded to in the last segment. Like, these primaries are playing out as if it were an open seat race. You've got a lot of competition here, but this is an incumbent, Cornyn, who's been in for quite a few years. He has a record of achievement, right, that he's, supposedly running on and that voters can sort of use in their calculations. What do we know about Cornyn's kind of legacy as a lawmaker in Congress?
He is an incredibly effective lawmaker. If we use the Center for Effective Lawmaking, we'll link to this website. It creates a score for how effective lawmakers are based on the types of bills they introduce. Are they introducing major bills? Or are they introducing these sort of post office renaming ceremonial bills? And then how far those bills get. So for context, only about 2% of bills that are introduced in Congress actually get signed into law. So it's very rare for any member of Congress to have any of their legislation signed into law, like even over their whole tenure, right? So it's very hard to get bills to sign into law. In the 118th Congress alone, Cornyn had 16 of his bills signed into law. He's ranked the most effective Republican lawmaker consistently. He has a score of 10 and the next person has a score of like 4. He is really bipartisan. Things like Juneteenth happened because of him. Promise I'm not stumping for him. It's just from a legislative perspective, like pretty impressive negotiating abilities and lawmaking abilities. But it doesn't seem to matter to voters. That's what's so interesting about it. Political science, we call this, he would be what we call a workhorse, right? A quiet behind the scenes person. And then you have your show horses. So people who are, we could think of famous members of Congress. Matt Gaetz is a great example from Florida. But Ken Paxton is a show horse, right? The types of bills that they pass or promote are, these sort of national bathroom ban sort of stuff. It's not a really hard-hitting legislation. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this a new thing that effectiveness may not matter? Is this a Trump era thing? What do you guys think about that?
My theory here is that what we're dealing with is that this is all an offshoot of what in poli-sci we call negative partisanship. That what especially voters in a primary, right? Again, we're still at the primary stage. The people who are turning out, like we talked about how there's record turnout, so maybe the equation is a little different this year, but the people who tend to turn out in primaries tend to be diehard partisans, more ideological to the left in Democrat primaries or to the right in Republican primaries. And these voters, poli-sci tells us, are motivated less and less by sort of positive feelings about their own party and more by negative feelings about the other party. And so your goal in these primaries, for better or for worse, I would maybe argue for worse, is to get out there and say how much you freaking hate the other side, how you are going to fight against them, rather than sort of demonstrating your nice legislative effectiveness resume on a sheet of paper. And Paxton, whatever you think about him, he is he is the human embodiment of owning the libs, right? This is especially in Texas. And I think an interest, we can talk about the Democrats too. I think Jasmine Crockett is kind of a living embodiment of this on the other side, that making her name in a lot of these hearings, calling out Marjorie Taylor Greene, all these other things. And so these are the dynamics at play in primaries. And I think this could help us explain why stuff like legislative effectiveness scores, which we love, are not necessarily so motivating to party primary voters. What do you think, Casey?
I think not are they not so motivating, they're not motivating at all. And we know this because if you look at the messaging of the candidates themselves, John Cornyn has a great record, a very conservative record. He will mention his conservative bona fides, but only in one way: how often he votes with the president of the United States. You will not see a press release, you will not see a commercial, you won't even see in the stump speech of how effective, what bills he passed. Because he knows that if he goes and asks voters to say, hey, what do you know about me? Or what do you think I've done in Congress? They would just stare at him like our students do on a pop quiz Tuesday. They have no idea. Right? It was like, I don't know what bill you passed. You've been in there a long time. And I think that you've been in there a long time message is going to be one of his biggest anchors, right? And we know that Paxton is going to tie him to the establishment, tie him to the swamp, because he has been here for a while and he's held leadership in positions in one of the most unpopular institutions in the world. So it's negative partisanship and more how conservative I am to support the president, who's obviously popular, especially with those Republican primary voters in Texas. So not motivating at all. Difference between campaigning and governing is about as wide as we have here with one of the most effective lawmakers versus maybe one of the hardest messaging challenges here for Cornyn, who can't just say, look how good I am at the job. It's like, nah, what have you done for me messaging lately? What have you done for me to stop the other side lately?
You mentioned, Casey, they're all trying to demonstrate how much they love Donald Trump and vote with Donald Trump and will stand with Mr. Trump, sir, when they get their next Senate election. But Trump hasn't made an endorsement, which is interesting in and of itself, that he hasn't endorsed the incumbent, John Cornyn, who has voted with him 99% of the time. What do we think's going on here? Is he torn between Hunt and Paxton? Is it the classic Trump thing of just not the race is close enough that he doesn't want to be a loser, and so he's just the thing he did in Missouri where he endorsed Eric even though everybody's name was Eric? Is that what's going on here?
I forgot about that. That was electric.
My take is cynical, and I think that he's holding it over Cornyn's head because he knows that Cornyn's not a true loyalist, and I don't have a ton of sympathy for that situation that Big John has found himself in.
Yeah, I think, well, number one, I know for a fact that the Cornyn people are just begging the administration for an endorsement. Show up, let's do a photo op, let's do something, let's attach each other, whether it's at the White House and especially back home in Texas, and they're just like, nah, they're not. Yeah. And to me, I think it's probably that, yes, there is probably some vengeance on the Trump side. He's not sufficiently loyal. He hasn't been sufficiently supportive vocally, which is not Cornyn's typical way of doing business. He's a silent type of guy. But I also think that just the kingmaker in Trump, especially as his influence wanes during his last couple years here, that he wants to pick the winner. He wants to pick someone, and right now it's just not certain. I think he can get away with it, kind of the Obama mantra of presidents don't involve themselves in primaries, let the voters decide, and then we'll have an endorsement. That still may be the case, but I think it's more simple that he doesn't see Cornyn as likely to win, or at least not certain enough, so why would I attach myself to anybody? And that's true for Paxton, too, which I know they have their backs and forth between those two as well.
It's just so interesting to compare it to Louisiana, though, that you talked about a few weeks ago, Charlie, which is Trump has already endorsed the challenger to the incumbent, an incumbent who wasn't really...
There's one major difference there. One of them voted for the impeachment of the president of the United States. I think there might be something there.
But, I mean, that endorsement, like, almost immediately tanked Cassidy's chances, right? I mean, the person entered the race, immediately shot to the forefront after the endorsement. So it's like, it is interesting that as we debate, like, does effectiveness matter? It seems that the Trump endorsement definitely does matter. So I think it captures what we're talking about in primaries. In primaries.
I mean, he's out there on Truth Social this week, like, endorsing state legislative challengers in Indiana because the Republicans wouldn't go along with his redistricting plan. Like,
and he couldn't pick them out of a lineup. Like, if you just put these guys up, they'd be like, which one of you did I endorse? I did it on the internet. There's no way he knows
who these people are. So funny. So funny. All right, let's go to the gavel drop. We're going to share some last stories here before we adjourn and head out the door. SoRelle, let's go to you. A couple options to talk about this week. What are you going to hit us with?
Well, they're both about the State of the Union. So we just had the State of the Union this week, longest ever recorded. What a delightful experience. So it was interesting, like we mentioned last week, to see how the Democrats would respond. No signs. So you got your request, Charlie. No little signs.
I did get my wish there. Yeah.
But there was some yelling.
There was one.
There was one, which is what I'm going to talk about. So,
nice. Okay, here we go.
So Representative Green had a sign, and he was removed from the House chamber. So just as in the case of last State of the Union, there was a call for Representative Green to be censured. So when a member is censured, they are essentially like removed from their committees. They're made kind of like useless in the House or in whatever chamber they're in. Other cases of people threatening to be censured is Representative Omar has been threatened with this. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene was threatened with censure, had a vote on this. Censures are getting out of control, and so there's a new movement by some House members to raise the threshold required to actually censure a member of Congress. I think this quote by Representative Himes is great about raising the threshold. I'm in camp, shut this shit down. We'll spend the next year censuring each other. It's bullshit. We need due process, right? So when even the rank and file members are like, this is too much, let's raise the threshold or we're going to tit for tat, is super interesting. And it seems like Speaker Johnson may be willing to take this up as well.
Censures are a weird thing. They can take on a ton of different forms. They don't come with automatic like expulsion from committees. That's a separate vote that used to be a no-touch red line. Usually they relied on their own party to have it's like parents with their own kids, right? Now we have it as parties of their opposite kids. So it's basically me telling your kids, SoRelle, you need to be punished because you are a bad parent and not doing it yourself. And they have to come to like the well and just get lambasted. They have to sit there while the censure debate is going on. It's kind of like a public shaming, but and it's definitely becoming a more and more norm. And the more you see it, the more you'll do it type stuff. So I'm for this. I also think it doesn't matter that much. Like usually when you get to censure vote type stuff, though, if it's going to get a vote, you're putting the other side in a position to defend pretty indefensible behavior, right? Like if you're talking about a decorum type of debate. And usually the votes are just pretty skyrocketed. They're overwhelmingly bipartisan because it's just at this point, take your medicine, go move on. We don't want to talk about this. So I'm not surprised that leadership wants to get this passed because they, A, don't want to use floor time on it and bring that type of attention to it. And then B, you're just giving a profile to someone who originally their whole goal was to get the profile. Like Al Green didn't show up not wanting to be seen with that sign. So it's like a Streisand effect of giving more attention to the person who is seeking that with behavior they know is beyond the pale.
Yeah, and it's also kind of galling, like these censures are just sort of being thrown around while, like another story that this isn't my gavel drop, but another story this week is this Tony Gonzalez, this member of Congress accused of the most like heinous stuff imaginable with female staffers, and like he's still in Congress. He's not. I mean, maybe he will get expelled if he doesn't resign. But meanwhile, we're throwing around censures for like holding up signs. And
yeah, I mean, because we already have an ethics committee. That's what is the Gonzalez issue is going through. The ethics committee is fully bipartisan. They review these ethics claims. The only problem with the ethics committee, well, there are many, but a major problem is is it's extremely time consuming. Like they will not come to an agreement or decision on the Gonzalez case for many, many years, right? And so censure does give that sort of like outlet to say like, we need to remove this person from the situation immediately. But I do agree. It is interesting, though, that the House has to invoke their own threshold. Like, couldn't they just be adults and decide like, hey, we're going to just be more selective in how they use this, right? It's just really encapsulates so much that they have to put their own rule on themselves in order to behave better.
Well, behaving better, that's the Senate's job, I guess. Which brings me to my gavel drop, which is about the filibuster, which we've talked about before. And the SAVE Act, which we've also talked about before, that the House passed. And, a lot of conservatives and certainly President Trump is pushing to get through in the Senate, but it would need to pass this 60-vote threshold. And so there's been this push to abandon, at least maybe temporarily, the 60-vote threshold and instead force what's called a talking filibuster, which is what people generally kind of think about when they think of the filibuster. It's, Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of stuff where you've got to get up there and actually hold the floor the entire time. Trump and the House GOP are pushing for it, but John Thune, the majority leader, has said there is, quote, no unified position within the GOP conference, which, translation basically means he doesn't want to do it. A lot of other Republicans don't want to do it, and there's not enough support for it, and is hoping the conversation, I assume, will just go away. He has argued, and I think he's right about this, that going down this road would basically make the ending of the partial shutdown of Department of Homeland Security more difficult. I think that's probably right. And one of my favorite quotes here, which I think really nicely illustrates the difference between the House and the Senate, is from Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas. And he said the situation is, quote, much more complex than what's being advertised by House members. We wouldn't vote on anything else for probably 2 or 3 months with no guaranteed outcome. And I think that's sort of emblematic of like the Senate wanting to sort of slowly consider things, and the House is just like, screw it, let's go and go for it. And I that's why I think this is probably not going to happen. But I'm curious what you guys think.
No, it ain't going to happen. They don't have the votes for it. The leader doesn't want to do it. It is incredibly complicated.
Unless you get a lot of Ken Paxtons in office.
Yes. I think that the filibuster is going to get marginally chipped away at, but it's not going to be through this. If for no other reason, you're going to literally stall the floor again, Streisanding effect. If you don't think Democrats are going to be united and so willing to use the two-speech rule for months and months and months, as campaigning is supposed to be happening, as they're all worried about their seat, heading into a midterm on a bill that there are enough co-sponsors with, but co-sponsors are very, very different than taking the actual vote on the floor. So There's just not enough win here. There's not enough agreement here. And Democrats would love, A, the precedent of it, and B, the opportunity to be up there. You can just see the little pictures on the small picture on news, right? Of like, what's happening on the floor now? It's like the oil spill camera that just was going. It's just it's bad politics, and it's bad procedure for Republicans right now who don't agree on much.
Plus, Democrats have more to gain in the long term in getting rid of the filibuster in some way, because they are never going to, I mean, at least geographically in the near term, they are never going to get 60 votes again. And Republicans are much more likely to get closer to that and peel off a couple Democrats. And so I think Thune certainly understands that that's the calculus and that this is a bad idea for them in the long term.
Yeah, it's not only the geographic advantages, but Republicans' like major legislative priorities, which is conservative justices and tax cuts, can be passed with only 50 votes. So it's really not worth burning this bridge for policies that are more unpopular, right? Like this DHS appropriations bill or healthcare bills, right? They need that backstop also to just protect them from what comes from the House, right? They don't want to have to take a vote on everything that the House sends them. And so again, I guess our gavel drops are about the constraint that rules provide these members and how they need that guideline.
We love some good rules. rules. So with that, I think we'll close it out for this week. We got to a lot. And thanks in part to our excellent guest and co-author, Casey Burgat. Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Absolutely. You guys are doing awesome. This is fun. The highway to Hill. We're on it. We're traveling.
We're on it, whether we like it or not. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.